A heavy civilian death toll in northern Gaza and alleged forced displacement of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from the area has fuelled speculation that Israel is secretly implementing a siege plan designed to starve out Hamas militants. The strategy was put forward by a group of retired Israeli generals. It calls for the evacuation of all civilians from northern Gaza before anyone who remains is cut off from food, fuel and medicine. The Israeli Defence Force has repeatedly denied suggestions it's put the so-called General's Plan into action. Middle East correspondent Matthew Doran spoke to the key architect of the strategy, retired IDF General Giora Eiland.
Giora Eiland, thank you for making the time for us. You've become the public face of this plan that's being commonly referred to as the General's Plan for northern Gaza. How would you sum up what this plan is all about?
I came to the conclusion that we are conducting the wrong war in Gaza. Actually, it was my conclusion about a week after the beginning of the war, about a year from now ago. The Israeli strategy is based on only one kind of pressure, a military pressure. And both the politicians and the military believed that if we use an effective and strong military pressure, it is not only that we will be able to crush Hamas, but above all, we will be able to bring back the Israeli hostages that are still suffering miserable conditions in the tunnels of Gaza. And I understood from the beginning that it will not work. And I came to the conclusion that the only thing that might be painful to the leadership is to take a land from them. We live in the Middle East, and in the Middle East there are only two important matters to leaders. The first is the honor, or if you can cause damage to their honor, if you can humiliate them. And the second thing, which is more important, is land. If you can take a land from them, land is much more important than human lives. So my conclusion was that we have to conquer the northern part of Gaza. First phase, to call all the civilians who live there to evacuate this area. So we should give them a week or 2 weeks to evacuate from this area via two corridors that we can provide, which are very, very safe corridors. And after all the civilians leave and only the combatants stay, then we don't have to fight. We simply can enforce a very strong, strict and effective siege. So in the end of the day, those combatants who stay in this area will have to decide either to surrender or to die in starvation.
When we're talking about civilians and civilians being told to evacuate, is there a fear that some may get swept up in that siege afterwards because they haven't been able to get out? Because under this proposal, anyone who is left behind, they are effectively considered to be enemy combatants. Is that right?
No, not at all, and I emphasize it again and again. Number two, even if after a week or 2 weeks from the day that we give this warning to the population to leave, the passages, the safe passages, the safe corridors that they can use in order to evacuate will be open 24/7. So even if some people prefer to stay and change their mind after a week or 2 weeks, they can still leave this area.
But is the problem getting to those passages once the siege begins?
They can leave. And again, if humanitarian organizations say to us, and we have a full cooperation with them, that they still need to send some convoy to the area in order to evacuate more civilians who are left behind, it will be no problem. So this is something that it is not a problem. If some people want to stay and make a decision that they prefer to be in this area, then yes, they are taking some risks that I don't think that they should take.
And they would then be subject to starvation?
The safe corridor is open. In any time they will be able to walk away. Why they should stay there if there is no supply that enters this area, and only 5 kilometers south of this area there will be enough food and water and medicines and all other things. Why to stay?
Let's pick up on this issue around how this complies with international law. International law states quite clearly that the forced displacement of civilians is not permitted during times of conflict.
Not at all. It is not permitted if it is an intent to do this permanently. But if you want to make sure that certain area is more clear, and you said to the people, this is going to be a very tough military zone, and you are advised to leave these people because otherwise you might be killed, this is something which is much more humanitarian than the other way around.
If they are moved out of this area, how quickly would they be able to come back? Because that seems to be the clincher here when it comes to compliance with international law. You've pointed to it being a temporary displacement rather than a permanent displacement. Is there a risk, though, that they would never be able to go back to there?
It depends on the political, let's say, agreement or deal arrangements after the war. In the end of the day, there will be some political arrangements, and then they will be able to return to this area. But of course, they will not be able to return to this area before the Israeli hostages are returned. This is something that has to be very clear to everyone. More than that, if Hamas decides not to release the Israeli hostages whatsoever, and if in few months, and this is our prediction, there will be 0 alive Israeli hostages in Gaza, then probably this area will never return to the Palestinians.
There has been some suggestion that the way the IDF is conducting its affairs in Gaza at the moment, particularly in the north, is effectively adopting this plan and putting it into force. Would you agree with that?
Not at all. What the IDF is doing is that they began the large ground operation in a time that most of the civilians, the 400,000 people who are there, are still there. So it is true that they called them to leave, but first they began the ground operation, and actually they risked the life of many, many civilians.
Could this plan, though, if it is put in place in the way that you are advocating here, be a proxy effectively for a permanent land grab for settlements, Israeli settlements to be built in northern Gaza to try to occupy that land ongoing?
Not at all, and at least this is strongly not only against my recommendation, this is also something that Prime Minister himself said, that he would not allow any resettlement of Israelis within Gaza. But from the military point of view, it is more than legitimate, as I said, to conquer land from the enemy until better conditions are met.
Have you considered or done any sort of modelling or any sort of workshopping as to how many militants you might be able to root out as a result of implementing that sort of plan, and also how many civilians may die as a result of that plan being put in place?
The number of civilians that would die as a result of my plan is by far lower than the number of civilians that are killed today during the regular battles. I could save the lives of all the civilians there and force the combatants there either to surrender or to die, and without any risk to the Israeli forces. So it has only an advantages compared to the existing tactics that are used by the IDF. Now, if this plan, my plan, is a bad plan, I would ask anyone else to give me a better plan.
Let's wrap up our conversation, I guess, with some of the criticism that's been levelled at you. Where do you think that criticism comes from?
This criticism comes from two kinds of people. The first are ignorant, people who know nothing, who do not know anything about the law of the armed conflict. So this is one group of people who are completely clueless. Among those people, there are many, many people who never read my plan. They have a wrong perception about what the plan is all about, and they criticize not the plan, but what they think that this is the plan all about. And this is a very not professional, ignorant, and even not a fair way to do certain things. And the other kind of people are evil people who are against Israel, and actually they don't want to reach any solution to the problems in Gaza.
You've identified two groups who are critics here, the ignorant and the evil, to use your turn of phrase. Is there not a third group who has read your plan, who have considered its consequences, and who do still remain vehemently opposed to it and very concerned about the impact it could have on innocent Palestinians?
I did not hear anyone who read my plan and said, I found that this plan is bad, inconsistent with the international law, or might cause more damage or more casualties to civilians compared to the existing tactics. You cannot compare my plan to a complete peaceful situation.
Giora Eiland, thank you for your time.
You're welcome.